How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, today on Wednesday, September 11th, to go over some more of the NFL headlines that we have on store for you guys today. A lot to get through, some injury updates from the 49ers and their running back, Christian McCaffrey. We're going to go through his latest status, what's going on with that calf injury, and whether or not it is something to be concerned with going forward. Then, after this past weekend, after their offense is disappointed, the Falcons and the Bengals, who is closer to reaching a breakthrough moment in Week 2, where both of them, I think, really need big wins to forget about their Week 1 performances, and also some more topics coming down the line as well. But before we get started, like I always do, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any questions during the show, we want to hear about it. Any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share, we always make it known to you guys that your input and anything you have to say is a big part of what makes this show great. We thrive on your energy and insights. Whether it's a comment, question, or opinion you just have to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that. Use the super chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But if you do prefer the alternative method, we do still have the Tip and Donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, where you guys are still able to leave a comment or question there if you prefer. We couldn't do this show without your amazing support, and we're always so thankful to have you guys as part of our community. So please remember to use the super chat button with whatever you have to say during today's show. But we are able to move on now to some of the biggest news, I think, leading into Week 2, having to do with the 49ers and arguably their best player, Christian McCaffrey, who didn't play in Week 1. Obviously, you couldn't have noticed if he didn't play in Week 1 with how good Jordan Mason played in that game, almost 150 yards rushing, a touchdown scored, a great debut of sorts for Jordan Mason to kind of take over the lead running back role for Christian McCaffrey. But again, you couldn't have been able to tell if Christian McCaffrey wasn't playing with how good Jordan Mason played. But getting to this injury with Christian McCaffrey, if you weren't aware, he has been dealing with this calf injury all throughout camp. He's been dealing with this as it was reported. It held him out of training camp for a good amount of time. Then, leading up to it, around the time that Brandon Ayuk and Trent Williams sort of returned to practice, Christian McCaffrey was also participating. So, in my mind, I'm thinking, he's going to play. Everybody's good. The 49ers got the band back together. They're all going to play the majority of these games, right? At least to start the year. But about an hour and a half to 2 hours before Monday Night Football began, he was ruled out. But again, didn't really affect the game plan, it seemed, right? With how well Jordan Mason played. But you're thinking, at least I'm thinking, with the calf, it's a little bit give or take. It's a little unpredictable as well, because you think of your calf muscle, you're using it pretty much with anything you do throughout the entire day. So I'm thinking, it's no big deal. It's only Week 1. This is just an over-cautionary measure by the 49ers to just make sure Christian McCaffrey is doing all right, and then it's not going to be anything that carries on. But now, recently, head coach Kyle Shanahan gave more clarity on Christian McCaffrey's status, and he said the following here. He said, it's not just the calf, it's the Achilles, and the Achilles is tendinitis, and that stuff comes and goes, and when it's acting up, it's something you've got to be very careful about. And after that sentiment, he reiterated that Christian McCaffrey told them during the lead-up of the Week 1 preparation for the Jets that if this was a playoff game, he would be able to play. He would have, in essence, sucked it up and just gone out there and played for the 49ers. And that statement there, Christian McCaffrey telling him that he would be able to play through it if it was the playoffs makes me think back to just last season, right? If I can take you back there, one of their last couple games was with the Washington Commanders, I want to say, towards the end of the season, the regular season last year. I want to say was the very last game, so it kind of explains how everything worked itself out. But back in that game against the Commanders won that game, and it was a pretty big surprise, but in large part because Christian McCaffrey did not play. That was the beginnings, or somewhat of the beginnings, of this calf problem that still is bothering him to this day. You saw it last year with the Commanders. He went out of that game. He didn't return in that game because of that calf injury. Then they, didn't want to rush him back into that game because they had pretty much everything locked up. They saved them to the playoffs, and he played through it. He played through this lagging, lingering calf injury throughout the playoffs. And even in the Super Bowl as well, I do recall there was some plays where he'd be on the sideline trying to work it out, getting treatment on it, getting some trainers to work on it, keeping it loose and stuff like that. But again, no big deal because Christian McCaffrey's playing. It's the Super Bowl. It's the playoffs. No one's thinking about the calf injury to such a dire extent. But, he played through it. Then, obviously, they don't win the Super Bowl. We go through this offseason, and it still seems to be bothering him. And now, in a way, if you're talking about how this has all transitioned, now talking about Achilles tendinitis, for anybody that hears that now, it could be seen as a worsening of this calf injury in a sense to some people, right? Because before, you're not really worried about the Achilles. When you hear calf, you're thinking maybe it's just a strain, maybe it's just a little tight. They don't want to overwork it. But now when you work down to the Achilles a little bit more, now it gets more serious, right? Essentially, with Achilles tendinitis, if not too many people are familiar with it, having this now be a potential problem for Christian McCaffrey, this could weaken the Achilles tendon, which could make it more vulnerable to tearing it completely, which would obviously lead to season-ending surgery for Christian McCaffrey. So that's kind of the thickness of the ice we're walking on right now, right? You can kind of see through the ice. You could potentially fall through and have this be a worst case scenario if you're Christian McCaffrey and you come back too quickly. But right now, it seems like the 49ers are staying patient with this. They're being cautious with Christian McCaffrey, obviously, especially now with how Jordan Mason played. I think they're in a good spot that, they are saving Christian, but now they're in a even better spot because they have a running back now that they can give the ball 28 times like he did against the New York Jets. And that's a very great thing to have. And then Kyle Shanahan also mentioned in that statement that he considered Christian McCaffrey as day-to-day right now, but NFL media reported a little bit later on that Christian McCaffrey is considered a long shot to play in week 2. So, day-to-day, I'm thinking that you're potentially going to play this week. If he's considered a long shot to play, if anything, he's going to be week to week, right? But right now, the 49ers are very fortunate that they have time on their side. That's why my concern level with this injury to Christian McCaffrey isn't too great at this moment because we are only talking about week 1, right? Nothing's going to be determined in the next month or anything like that, not really. Then you have Jordan Mason obviously playing great. Their defense looks very well. I had some questions about it, but they're looking very solid. Talanoa Hufang is coming back as well, their safety. And it seems like they're just on track to keep getting better. As good as they played in week 1, somehow it looks like they can get better, a little bit sharper, a little bit more efficient. So that's a good thing. And if you do that all without Christian McCaffrey, I don't think there's a real rush to get him back with how everybody really started off the season very well. I mentioned it yesterday. They just picked off right where they left off, it seems. It seems nobody was trying to work off any rust or anything like that, which is a great sign. But talking about this injury, the calf, the Achilles, those seem to linger a little bit. You look at Russell Wilson and his calf injury. I'm not saying it's tendinitis or anything like that, but obviously Russ is older than Christian McCaffrey as well. But those things are something you don't take lightly. You hear ACL, you hear fractures, sprains, tears, and things like that. When you mention a calf, it might not seem so severe like these other injuries tend to be, but for anyone that's dealt with it, I haven't dealt with it personally, but just from watching it with various players, it's something that can become annoying and something that really is hard to work off if you're not careful with it. So perhaps now with this extended time that Christian McCaffrey has to come back, maybe it changes their approach a little bit when he comes back, right? Because last year it was all just the Christian McCaffrey show, where I think that kind of didn't play out very well for them, didn't benefit them, because now overworking him in a sense last year, you get injuries like this. And now maybe it could just change their approach a little bit going forward with Jordan Mason. Depending on how long Christian McCaffrey's out, he can build up a good run of games, gain some more confidence, and then when Christian McCaffrey is healthy to come back, you kind of have this running back duo, running back by committee, if you will, if you want to call it that. And now it's not all just solely on the shoulders of Christian McCaffrey. You can give him some more rest than he got last year for sure, in that time that he was traded to the 49ers all the way up until the Super Bowl. So right now, my concern level isn't too great, but I just want to see how he looks when he comes back, and hopefully this isn't something that carries on for the rest of the year. But the 49ers are in a good place, not too concerned overly right now with Christian McCaffrey. So we're going to move on to the next segment. After this, like I mentioned, we're going to get into discussing the Falcons and the Cincinnati Bengals and how their offenses mostly disappointed, and we're going to compare both teams and decide which one is closer to looking like the projections that everybody had in their mind when talking about the Falcons with Kirk and all those weapons, and similarly with Joe Burrow coming back, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, and all the gang as well over there in Cincinnati. We're going to get to answering that question right after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.